So my talk's slightly different in the fact that I'm going to give you a whistle tour of my career. And what I thought would be really useful is just to highlight some of the challenges that have come along the way, and maybe some of the conceptions that I've had to readdress and think about and solve some problems. So obviously I've got a few more years behind me compared to the previous two speakers, so I have more slides, but we'll try and get through. But I think some of the points that have been raised in the previous talk come through again and again. So I'm interested in carnivores, and I've been very, very lucky to have a career where I've been able to work with animals, and obviously I work with carnivores, which is my passion. But my passion was from a very young age, like some of the other speakers. I like to handle animals. The animals didn't like to be handled, but I realised that I did want to work with animals. But I think that also gave me a stereotype. So I think in a research environment, if you're a person who likes animals, you very quickly get called a bunny hugger. Your science isn't real science. You just want to save the world, But I really did have a passion. I wanted to work with animals, and I wanted to do something to help them, to save them, to protect them from the exploitation. So I think a lot of people are aware of what's happening in the world. 30 years ago, when I started getting my passion, I was singing and shouting about it then, and it's only now that people are starting to really realise, actually, we are doing something, we are making species extinct, and we do need to do something about it. I think, as you can see, I do like hugging. I've got loads of photos. Every single photo of me as a child is hugging an animal. But what I realised when I was a teenager about this age is my brain worked differently than everybody else. That's what I thought. And that's because I just couldn't understand things the way people explain them. So I got a label as well as a stereotype of a bunny hugger as somebody who was stupid. And I did get called stupid quite a lot because my words didn't come out right. They got jumbled, my thoughts got jumbled. And whenever somebody tried to explain something, I had to get them to explain it in a simple way and maybe break it down or do it in a different way. And I was always drawing and visualizing things. So I found quite a lot of subjects really hard. And I would nag my teachers going, please, can you just explain it in another way or a simple way? And I think that was a big step for me. At the time, people didn't really know what dyslexia was, and we didn't get assessed, and nobody picked it up in me. But I did know my brain worked differently. So quite a few of my colleagues will say, when you go and talk to her, sometimes she'll be there writing it or scribbling it or visualizing it. Or I might say, look, I have to see it, or you have to explain it differently, or can you explain it again? Or can I say what you've just said back to you so I am very clear what you're saying to me? But it didn't stop me. I got very frustrated at people calling me stupid. So I think my whole career is just trying to prove that I'm not stupid. Which is quite sad, but I do think that's what it was. So I managed to get to Durham University, and I noticed when I was doing these slides that I did have some real inspiration at Durham, so I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I did want to work with animals. Everyone told me to go and be a doctor because you get more money, but I wanted to work with animals. And then at Durham, one of my lecturers, Nigel Dunstan, had a passion for mammals, and he started introducing me into the joys of mammals, which is usually poo. So this is badger poo, which I studied for my last year. My final project was just looking for badger poo, looking for badgers. But I loved it, so that was me. Behavioural ecology and mammals is what I got a passion for. What I noticed is actually at Durham there were no female academic role models. There was no female professors. We weren't taught by any sort of female staff. I remember one old female academic coming in who was a spinster, who had no children. I think she was a botanist, and they sort of wheeled her in, and that was the diversity at Durham at the time, and that's what the role models you're looking at. If it's all white males teaching you, then how can you aspire to maybe challenge that? So I thought I'd use an example of a badger. So this is a little bit like a dyslexic trying to do academia, which is very set and structured. You physically are not adapted to climb that tree. But what you have to develop is determination. So you try and find ways around it, okay? So this badger managed to get the peanuts somebody had put on that tree, but it was a really tough climb. So this is my life. This is how I work. It's hard work. So after I finished my degree, I wanted to work with animals. I wanted to do a PhD, but I wasn't sure where to go, what to do. I wrote to loads of people saying I wanted to do research on mammals. Again, at that time, most of the academics who were doing research on mammals were all males, so it did feel quite intimidating. But my supervisor, Nigel, had a project in Jordan he was setting up, and he said, oh, you could probably do it, but you're female, so you probably can't do it. So he didn't let me do it for 6 months because he was trying to find a male to go out to the Middle East. And I can understand why, being in an Arabic country, as a female, on your own, not speaking to the language is quite challenging. But he came back to me after 6 months. He couldn't find somebody else to do it. So he said, you can go and do it. So this is my PhD. I didn't get fully funded. We were funded through the Darwin Initiative, which paid for my fieldwork, and then I managed to get a scholarship through the BBC Marion Zunz Award. And this looks a bit like Mars. You can see the river valleys, and I used to call it Mordor. So this is an old volcanic. You can see it's very difficult to drive around with a Land Rover. But this is my study site, and it's on the Syrian border. Now you can't go to it. I went to study carnivores because that's what my passion was. And we knew there was some carnivores there because we'd found some evidence. But after the first couple of months, I realised a lot of them had been killed and shot. Sometimes by the border police, sometimes by the Bedu. And there was a huge fear of carnivores, lots of different folk stories. I did manage to see a couple. I found some evidence. But this is a dead fox that the police shot for me and said, oh, yeah, we found your carnivore. We shot it. We just were practicing shooting. So unfortunately, there was conflict. And this started me getting on that path of why do people kill things? Because they're scared of them. But they have a really important functional role. So why do we kill carnivores? Why don't we respect them? So I found out that actually I wanted to go on, my whole proposal was based on carnivores, and there was none there. So I had to focus and change my study to small mammals, to gerbils. So this is one of my gerbils called Spot. He made a burrow in my tent, came back regularly. And also plants and vegetation, and I'm not very comfortable with vegetation, but I had to do it because you have to adapt. So this is me trapping small mammals, and my whole PhD was based on small mammals. And because of limited data, I obviously didn't make huge impact in terms of publications. Managed to get a couple of publications from my PhD, but it wasn't going to necessarily get me a postdoc or a job. I did get offered to go to Israel to study small mammals in the desert, and also a possible postdoc in America. But after 3 years of 50 degrees, I had slightly had enough of deserts and wanted a bit of a break. So finding a postdoc was a little bit challenging. I got approached by an organisation called Green Force to run a volunteering So they do volunteering, so people can sign up. There's lots of these. People sign up, they go off, and they spend sort of 3 to 6 months in a country doing biodiversity surveys. So I think my experience of working in a quite an extreme environment, leading biodiversity surveys, led me to this job. So this is our camp in Zambia. We worked in Kafue National Park. This is my tent. This is where I lived for a year. That's my desk. It still looks like that. And so I was here, and we were just surveying as many different species as possible, all the way from elephants to beetles. We were cataloguing, we were assessing habitat responses, and we were working in quite a large section of Kafue National Park in Zambia. So here's some of the work we were doing. We were looking at diet of elephants freshly in the morning, doing elephant counts, and working with the local communities about education. At the end of this postdoc, I'd written a few papers based on the data, again, not sort of blue sky groundbreaking, but essential information about wildlife in national parks. And this area also comes into a lot of conflict because people want to utilise the parks, and obviously the park staff are trying to stop people coming in and killing elephants. Elephants and human conflict was quite high in this area, and we a few people died whilst we were there from the conflict, and many more elephants died from the conflict. But when I went to publish, apparently the memorandum of understanding between the company and the Zambian Wildlife Authority hadn't been signed. So I was told I couldn't publish any of the data, and it's probably sat in a box somewhere in Zambia Wildlife Authority. But I had to just get over that, but obviously that has an impact on my career, because now I'm a postdoc with not a strong publication record. Who's going to employ me? And it's very difficult to get an academic job. So my resolution to this problem is look at what my strengths are, and I encourage you to do this. Just because you see other people going through PhD, postdoc, academic, lovely papers or big grants, doesn't work for everybody, and it doesn't necessarily mean if one thing doesn't work, you're not going to be able to progress. So what was my USP, my unique selling point? So I'd done a lot of work working and training volunteers, and that fed nicely into teaching. I've got a lot of overseas experience doing survey works, also working in teams, very, very difficult teams, working with people and trying to get the best out of those teams in challenging environments. So I decided after Zambia I would try and just pick up a few little bits of sort of contract work just to expand and develop my USB. So I went and helped out one of my friends in Tanzania who was doing his PhD on cheetahs and Maasai conflict. So again, that human-wildlife conflict was very interesting, why people were killing carnivores. And we lived in the back of a Land Rover, so I went from a tent to this is the bed, that's the cooking. That was full of beetles because the light was on and all the beetles flew in. But we got to study some amazing animals and get to see some incredible experiences from the back of that Land Rover. Because of my experience in biodiversity surveying, I got asked to work with WWF in Patagonia in Chile. So this is me and a Chilean research assistant. This is the South Patagonia ice field. So we were just on the edge of the ice field with this massive big glacier. And we were surveying small mammals. And this is a codcod, which is a type of cat. This is a melanistic form of that cat. And these species also carry hantavirus, so you can see that we're all kitted up. So I went to Chile a couple of times working with WWF, but also with Rally International. So again, developing that volunteer experience. This was the other side in Chile. This is more of the grasslands in Patagonia, working with large volunteer teams. Some of these teams were people who had sort of coming in from drug rehabilitation, lots of different mixes, lots of different challenges of managing teams, getting people impassioned. And I could see the value of allowing people experience with wildlife, with teamwork, with experiences to completely change their lives. And I still value that highly. So we didn't get many publications from this, but what we did do is write reports for CONAF. So this was doing, again, recording what species. There was no records of what species were there. We were catching species, identifying them, coming up with catalogues, and they all go into management plans. So really at the forefront of sort of conservation-informed management. So at this time I was 27, and I was applying for jobs because I'd like a job rather than all this little contract work. And I got my first lectureship at Brighton when I was 27. And I think they employed me not based on my publication record, but because of my experience with volunteers, with training, and with overseas experience. And they thought that I could bring that to my teaching. So this is the very first ecology cohort that we had, and some of them were a lot older than me. So I felt a little bit out of my depth. But I had a challenge. So in academia, they expect you obviously to publish, to get grants, bring in income, and get my research off the ground. And so again, I used what I was good at, which is working with volunteers, working overseas, and doing biodiversity surveys to write a few little small grants to go and get involved with different projects. So one of the projects I've mentioned there is Earthwatch. Now, Earthwatch fund projects where volunteers pay to come and do research. And if you manage it well, you can get publications and data from that research. So there was a project in Estonia on coastal wet grasslands. And so I came into the project. I was helping with the grasslands, plants again. But I also was radio tracking striped mice to look at the impact of coastal flooding on behaviour. And then I also applied for some funding, a small amount of funding for a couple of months in Madagascar to look at the impacts of deforestation on biodiversity. So that was a grant from the British Ecological Society, Royal Geographical Society, just small amounts of money, but you can do a lot with a small amount of money as an ecologist. So in Madagascar, we were looking at biodiversity surveys. This led to a publication on the impact of forest clearance. And 10 years later, this was one of the data that fed into this international database called the PREDICTS database. So those little small things are not to be undervalued because they can tie into bigger data sets to make really big differences. So this database now is across the globe to look at the impact of deforestation across the whole of terrestrial systems. And there is about 400 co-authors on that paper. Again, small amount of money from the British Ecological Society to go to work with Zoological Society in Indonesia. We were studying the impacts of palm oil on tigers, but I was focused on small mammals, so I get to do all the rat stuff. But obviously my passion is the carnivores, but I do like small mammals as well. And because of the links with ZSL, I was asked to go and teach in Mongolia, so back to a desert. And I was teaching Mongolian students about desert ecosystems and how to do surveys. We collected some pellets and managed to get a small paper from that as well. But it was really a teaching post in a completely different foreign country, teaching students from very, very different cultures. Now, one of the visits that I'd been to is South Africa, visiting a project on meerkats. And because I developed links in South Africa, when I started at Brighton, I wanted to expand that. So I developed a field course for students to go to South Africa. So this is our first cohort of students. That's why the photos are all fuzzy. First cohort of students that went to South Africa on a field course. And one of my colleagues who was really out of his comfort zone going to South Africa, but amazing experience. Now, Brighton have run this field course ever since. It's been running for about 15, 16 years. As part of that, we managed to get a PhD funded student, Rick, who is now an associate professor at Nottingham Trent. So he was my first PhD student. And he was focusing on small mammals, because I said, if you focus on carnivores, you won't get any data. You have to do small mammals. So I tried to divert him away from making the mistake of thinking carnivores were easy to study. So we did manage to get some papers on small mammals, including this little elephant shrew called Sengi. But we were both interested in this animal, which is a brown hyena. So there's only 4 species of hyena, and this is probably the least studied. So Rick and I, with Earthwatch and my experience from Earthwatch, developed a project on human-carnivore conflict in South Africa. Many of the farmers kill the carnivores there through fear, high levels of persecution. This is a hyena which has got an old snare wound around its neck. And so we want to investigate this a bit more. So I get to set up loads of fantastic camera traps and catch loads of really cool animals. But obviously not just the hyenas are killed, leopards, cheetahs, all sorts of other species are persecuted as well. So again, using my strengths of working with Earthwatch volunteers, setting up programs that volunteers can get involved with, exciting projects sort of like on carnivores, working with teacher teams. So in Earthwatch, we've set up a teachers team, and so they train the teachers and then go back and train the schools. And I managed to get another PhD student, Michelle, who was really prolific in writing papers. She was amazing. So we managed to get a lot of data out of the hyenas on methods, on trapping, large surveys. So we came up with maps, distribution maps of all the carnivores for the Northwest Province, and then extend it to the whole of South Africa. And we also found the persecution rate. So this little animal here called a black-backed jackal, there's around about 17,000 jackals killed every year through persecution, but it doesn't seem to have a major impact on the population. So we wanted to know what was happening. She also introduced me into sort of drivers and social studies because she was interested in that. So I think the message here is your PhD students teach you. You can't go out and learn all this, but working with a PhD student is an amazing opportunity to start sharing and exploring different ideas. So as a PhD student, you are really valuable for the learning and the process of your supervisor as well. They don't know everything, but they're there as a good sounding board. Another PhD who focused on the jackals was Rob James. He sort of started getting me into genetics. So we do quite a bit of genetics now, looking at how we can understand genetic effects of culling animals or taking animals out and how that affects the populations. And then another PhD student, Niall, who's just finished, he was interested in the social side, and we also started seeing the impact of our work. So when people stop killing things because they think there's another way, then we know that we're having some form of consequence that, you know, we're hoping to save animals by understanding why people kill them in the first place. So obviously through your career things happen, and this happened, a bit of a shock. Whoa! Husband and kids, wasn't planning that. But as Melissa said before, get your kids involved. So obviously at this age I didn't take them out badger trapping, but this is my youngest who recently came out badger trapping, and he did a little YouTube video of how to catch a badger, which is just great. So this is sort of like all the activity I was doing in the background, but obviously I was thinking about my progression. So I started off as a lecturer, and then I did a PG Cert in higher education. I took on course leadership for biology and then ecology. I designed the ecology course. And then not too long after, I progressed to senior lecturer. After senior lecturer, I became head of biosciences for 6 years. Now, I got pregnant here. And as soon as I got pregnant, I applied for my principal lecturer. And that's on purpose, because I just thought, if I don't get this promotion now and I have children, I might not get it in future, or it might take me a long time to get back. So as soon as I got pregnant, I had a massive big push to say, right, I'm going to get my principal lecturer before I go on maternity leave. And I did. I got that promotion, which allowed me to then, when I came back, adjust back in, and then I wanted to get more focused on research. So I became deputy head of school for research. I did my HEA senior fellowship, because obviously this is sort of some of the educational side. And then that, combined with research, led me to my professorship. And then I think having obviously the professorship allowed me to apply for head of life sciences. So I have been continued to try to keep going to the next step. And I think for a female academic, it's easy to stop and not take things on because you're quite happy where you are. And when I talk to other female academics, why don't you apply for promotion? Why don't you go for this? Why don't you go for that? And they're going, well, it will affect my work-life balance. You know, my kids are my priority. I don't want to compromise that. And I think that's what Melissa was picking up as well. You know, it is really tough. But if you don't do it and if you don't lead, who else will? So how can we have role models if everybody keeps holding themselves back? So go for it, go for it. So there's a big challenge there. You can't do overseas fieldwork when you have 2 children. Now, some people say you can, just drag them along. But honestly, it's very hard to collect hyena poo when you have a child strapped to your chest. It was very hard to do water vole trapping when I was 8 months pregnant, but I tried. So I had to change. You know, you have to change. You can't keep doing all these trips all over the place because the kids become a priority. So I had to switch. So I'm thinking, right, what do I do? So I set up in-country teams and PhD students to keep the research going in South Africa. And I started new research in the UK. So as soon as I came back from maternity leave, I started setting up new research in the UK. So where was the gap? There's quite a lot of carnivore people in the UK, mammals. So I was trying to look for something else. I was using my experience on small mammals. Managed to get a PhD student on dormice, another PhD student on water voles and genetics, starting work with the RSPCA on things like hedgehogs. So we've managed to publish some research. Again, you can see Rick. So your previous network, your collaborators are really important to keep because you don't know where it's going to go. So we're looking at hedgehog rehabilitation. Also, I've recently done some work with the RSPB, looking at the impact of predators, so villainized badgers eating things like avocets. The RSPB don't want that to happen, but they obviously don't want to kill them either. So there's a balance there of how do we manage predators in conservation landscapes. and another one of my passions, which is foxes. So the reason why I'm interested in foxes is because there's a huge conflict. So previously I've come from working in Tanzania, where you've got lions attacking people, hyenas, leopards, tigers in Indonesia, and then stepping back to the UK, this is our biggest scary predator that people hate because it's getting in their way and pooing in the lawn and stuff. So the conflict to me is quite interesting, because how can we get so agitated about a small carnivore that doesn't really do very much apart from trying to cope with living around us? But because of this conflict and this interest in foxes in the UK, we were approached by a TV company, Channel 4 and Win4 Films, to do something called Foxes Live. And we did broadcast. So with a colleague, Bryony, we set up a website. So we were really interested in making it innovative and going out to a wider public. So the website, general public could go on, they could follow the foxes, they could answer questions about opinion, they could submit their records. And this was one of the first that used media to really get all that data from the general public. So within 3 weeks, we had 17,000 data points on one species, which for anybody with a PhD was like, well, we're still mining this data now, we're still publishing from this data now. So we did, we had some fantastic data about working with the media, and I think this opened up to the media looking at how do we utilize the general public, how do we do calls for action for data, and how is that data used. So we were trapping foxes and looking at ranges. Again, this data fitted into the RSPCA about how do we rehabilitate animals in an urban landscape, and we extended it to badgers so we could come up with citizen science-based methods. So very much going on my USP of working with volunteers, working with people, the general public, and engaging them in science. So people and animals are really interesting. People, the general public, want to know more about animals. They want to know what's happening in their back garden, and they want their opinions to be shared. And they also want information of how best to manage and look after wildlife. So I work with Dora from Fox Guardians. We do YouTube videos, myth busting and things like that, but really interesting relationships people have with wildlife. Because of that public interest, I've had lots of opportunities to work with the media. So I've worked with The One Show. I've worked, as I said, with Channel 4, Foxes Live, which was, if you can do live TV to about 2 million people, you can do anything. So if you're scared about anything and you've done that, you're like, yeah, I'm fine. Again, live TV Unsprung with Springwatch, and also with Chris Packham Springwatch, we've done multiple programs, not just from Springwatch, for other things as well. So I've had a really amazing opportunity to share my science and engage with the public and use that public engagement to collect more data to get more science. But one thing I think to draw back is about that access to the general public then allows you to collect more data. And so one of the things that we've done is started to collect data on animal behaviour. So this is what people have submitted to me from a call to he gets his name back, general public. And we're finding new insights about animals. So hedgehogs are not supposed to fight. They're supposed to only contact when they're breeding. They're not supposed to fight over a bowl of food. So we're finding out new information by using the insight from the general public. They've got cameras in their own gardens, and it really opens up that engagement between citizen science, people, and finding out new things about what's important to people. So I just wanted to sort of more or less finish about conflict. So what I've learned is how to deal with conflict, and that's quite helpful as a manager, because there's lots of conflict. So, and I think this is a really important lesson for you guys in life, because if you can think about conflict and anything that happens and try to approach it from a sort of standardized way, hopefully it will diffuse and you'll be able to come up with a solution to the problem without allowing that conflict to arise. So first of all, if something happens, try and assess the problem. What is going on? Why are they reacting the way they're reacting? What is the actual cause? Then talk to people around, try to get that communication and listen. Because even if it's not the same opinion as yours, it's really important to them, and there's some fundamentals in that. Try to assess the level of conflict. So is this going to escalate? In our sort of working with carnivores, that's how many animals get killed. and then try to assess the impacts. If you kill these animals, how that's going to have a knock on the impact of the ecosystem. So I think, if you don't address it and let it go, what are the impacts of you not addressing that conflict? Or if that conflict occurs, what are the ramifications? Get data. If you get evidence and data, that always sways people. You say, well, actually, this is the evidence, this is the data. So you can't really argue with that, but that's me as a scientist. Understand cultural differences, and I've been in lots of different cultures. And the thing is always go in with an open mind. So why are they acting this way? Why are they doing that? Just because I have my point of view doesn't mean that that point of view isn't valid. There's lots of different perspectives. Try to collate them and then try different management approaches. So try to come up with a solution to say, well, if we do this and we do that, will that resolve the problem? And if not, let's try a different way. So that's my coexistence toolbox of how to resolve conflict. So what are the fun bits about my job and my career? Deciding what to teach and research is amazing. I think all academics, you more or less get an opportunity to decide which way you go, what you're interested in, follow your passions. People pay you to follow your passions. Seeing people develop, giving them opportunities, not just students, but anybody you've come across that have had volunteer opportunities that have then gone to use it and do something with it, or even just change their lives is amazing. I managed to get to work with animals. I don't work with them as much now as I'd like, but loads of opportunities to travel, lots of field work outdoors. Working with the media is very interesting and challenging as well. Working with other people of similar interests and passions, don't play that down. Having a conversation with somebody about something that you're passionate about and them understanding it is really valued. My job and my interests emerge. So I like animals and I like my job, and unfortunately it's hard to sometimes disentangle, but I like the concept of blended. So my life is definitely blended, because when I go home I will watch wildlife programs, or I'll set up a camera in my garden and see what foxes are going on. So so making a difference. I think now my data is starting to be inputted into conservation practice. That's really important for me. Not so fun bits. Paperwork, dyslexic, doesn't go together. Takes me about 4 times as long to read anything, which is a struggle. And writing, trying to write something when you're dyslexic, when the value of you as an academic is on your publications, as a dyslexic is really quite hard. But don't take that. I think anything you do can be valid. There's no time limits. Life is never ending, so you have to learn to know when to stop. You never feel good enough. There's always more papers. There's always more research. There's another grant. There's another thing you can do. You can always tweak your lectures and make it better, but there's never enough time. So, you're always going to carry that guilt, but actually you've got to learn to deal with that. And getting that work-life balance is important. And then obviously managing difficult people, again, if you approach it from a conflict point of view, hopefully that will give you the confidence to be able to come up with some solutions. So my final words of advice. First of all, you are not a stereotype. Just because you have dyslexic, just because you're female, just because you like animals, doesn't mean that they should shove you in a box that you're stupid and you're a bunny hugger. Take all the opportunities you can when you can. And then when you're older, you probably have to learn to say no, but don't turn down opportunities. I've had the career I've had, and the opportunities that I've done is because I've taken risks. Going to Jordan as a female when I was 19 was scary, but I did it, and it actually completely changed my life, although I woke up nearly every morning going, I hate this place, I hate this place. Develop your own unique selling point. What are your strengths? Just because somebody else does a career like that doesn't mean you have to do it. Think about what works for you, and you create your own sort of niche in life, or niche if you're American. Keep your networks, develop strong networks, keep people around you, support other people. I've seen so many times where people are climbing up the ladder and they're standing on people and upsetting people to get up. It's not going to work. It doesn't work for me, and I don't want to be that person. I've always found that if I support people and support their development, then they support me. So that's just a different in terms of approach. An egotistic approach is you end up quite lonely at the top. Sometimes things won't work out. Just don't worry about it. Just try and find another path. Try another way. Try another option. Try and get over it really quick and say, right, okay, that didn't work. What are we going to do next? and realise there is no right or straight path. It's just a bit of a stepping stone. Do stuff that you're passionate about, do stuff that you're interested in, and you'll have an enriched life, and hopefully, you know, slowly it will progress. But what is success? Success is being happy. So at the end of the day, do stuff that you're passionate about, stuff that you love. Okay, that's me. Thank you.